welcome to another compliance catch-up. My name's James Hogbin. I'm the founder and CEO of Fingerprint Supervision. We provide policy-driven communication supervision and surveillance for regulated firms. Today, I am honoured to be joined by somebody who everybody in the industry knows, has become an industry legend, has worked pretty much everywhere and been at the forefront of regulatory hosting since regulatory hosting was invented. Sarah Donnelly joining us now. Here we are. Hello, Sarah. How are you?
Well, I'm very well. Wow, what an intro. Does legend just mean old?
I think we're getting to the legendary stage in our career,
Okay.
as my kids would have it. Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you get to be the founder of BMP and the go-to person for regulatory hosting in London?
Yeah, totally by accident is the simple answer to that. I've had sort of three careers. I was a recruiter and a headhunter for a very long time. I'm also am and was a garden designer. It was whilst I was working as a gardener that I was approached by a compliance consultancy back at the time called IMS. And I went in to look at their very small headhunting recruitment business and somehow never left and got more and more into the world of compliance. IMS Group bought at that time what was the Mirabella platform, and I worked at subsequent reiterations of that, Cordium and then ACA, and then we found ourselves 3 years ago forming Vittoria and Partners. So yes, I think by accident is probably the best way to describe how I've arrived to be doing regulatory hosting and compliance for the last 20 odd years.
Not a day over 21. It's perfect.
Yeah.
So for those of the people that are watching, explain regulatory hosting.
Yeah, in effect, regulatory hosting is a way for particularly new managers to start without going through the process of direct authorization with the FCA. So in effect, we lend or cover our permissions over the activities of those individuals. So that activity could be, for example, what I call a sort of private equity structure, whereby you've got a team here in the UK, they may have a team in Jersey, Guernsey, and what the team in London is doing is advising and arranging that board. So here in the UK, we would cover them under what's called the appointed representative regime, which you've probably heard of. The other activity we do is also cover individuals that want to conduct investment management activity. That is something that cannot happen under the appointed representative, but it happens in a slightly different structure whereby we second an individual into our firm under our permissions. And in effect, when that person is conducting the regulated activity of investment management, they're putting on a Vittoria and Partners hat at that moment. So from that point, we become their compliance department. And if it's an investment manager, we're overseeing the risk. So we sort of sit in between the firm and the FCA. And over the last 20 years, the industry has grown, partly in response to the FCA not necessarily being as quick on authorizations, although that is beginning to change a little bit, but more because of the substance requirements that the FCA is now looking for. The FCA actually put out a paper yesterday talking about why people failed in direct authorizations, and it was interesting. It was around exactly the subjects that come up with me every day, is that to be directly authorized now via the FCA, you need substance. It's financial and non-financial resources, and that means you have to have your regulatory capital in place. You have to have people. The days of being a one person coming out of a big asset manager and establishing on your own and being directly authorized are gone. The FCA wants more substance, more systems, more overlay, and for a lot of startups, that's just too much at the beginning.
And do you think that the FCA actually enjoy this market sector? Because there's the tension between you as a regulatory host servicing clients and you as a regulatory host being the regulator for those regulated clients. How does that balance exhibit itself, do you think?
Yeah, well, we would never call ourselves the regulator. We're just sitting in between. But I think it's common knowledge that there are problems, particularly in the aforementioned appointed representative regime. The FCA, I think, has constantly been surprised at how this industry has grown and the size of the industry, which in one way is very surprising considering all the reporting we do. It's but the way the FCA is set up is that at the moment it's not clear when you go onto the FCA register who is a principal firm like us, who is doing this, and I think so that has led to a lack of transparency as far as the FCA is concerned. I think the problem with our industry, and particularly the appointed representative part of our industry, is that what we represent, so our firm and most of our competitors, is a tiny part of an enormous industry. So we do something very specific. Us and our competitors only deal with institutional setups, so no retail investors. But there are over 34,000 appointed reps in the market, but they are all on the retail, wealth management, IFA side. And to date, the FCA has struggled to differentiate between what we do and what they do. And most people would never have heard of the appointed representative regime if they've not needed it, but they've probably met an AR, when they've gone to get car finance, funeral planning, all of these things now in the retail space are ARs, and when the FCA comes out and says we disproportionately see more complaints about ARs than we do directly authorised firms, my argument would always be, and I think all of our competitors in our industry would be, yep, but you're talking about the retail end of the market. That is not what we do. So there is a tension. The FCA, as I say, is always surprised at the size of our market. Realistically, though, I think the FCA over the last 2 or 3 years has looked at our firm and other competitors, and which has been incredibly useful. I won't say it wasn't a painful process, but it was incredibly useful. But I think they have recognised this industry is here to stay. They couldn't authorise those 34,000 retail IFAs. So more oversight, more guidance on how principal firms like us should operate, I think is the way they're going. I think there's also a political pressure being applied, I think is safe to say, from HMRC Treasury, who put out an article, I think last summer, basically saying that the appointed representative regime was vital for the growth of financial services in the UK. So I think there are tensions, but the death of the appointed representative regime is much overplayed as far as I'm concerned.
And so looking at the new AR regime on the FCA website, they are saying a big host principal is above 5 ARs, which seems a very, very small number to me, knowing where people are. And also within the last go round that they released, whenever it was, tail end of 23, I think, they were making a very big difference between a principal and a regulatory host, certainly in definition terms. But they don't seem to have done anything with that yet. Do you understand where they're going with that?
Yeah, I mean, there is a consultation paper that will actually name, regulatory hosting firms will be obvious on the FCA as regulatory hosting firms, which I think is a really, really positive step forward. I agree with you that the 5 is an odd number. It's got to be, you're a very small player in this industry if you've got 5 ARs. I mean, there could be firms. I suppose the other difference, I have a slightly different take on that, because regulatory hosting is all we do. We don't do anything else. So there are a lot of our competitors that regulatory hosting is a part of what they do, and they may offer admin, direct authorization support, compliance consultancy, all of those other areas. So you may find some of those firms may only have a small amount of ARs because but for us, this is all we do. So so that figure does seem incredibly low. I think our experience of the FCA, certainly our interactions with them, have been again a bit like
what you say here.
No, this is going to be quite positive. Their focus is really on competency and capacity. That was very strongly coming out, that The amount of clients all of our people are overseeing, the experience of the individuals, that was their focus, which for us was refreshing, because that is what we've concentrated on. So there are various consultation papers happening. There's also this consultation paper talking about a sort of ERA equivalent light FCA action. I just exactly. I mean, if you say, even with massive political change, I can't see that regulation is going to roll back, and a slightly easier application would not impact our business at all, because to the point earlier, some people use us as a speed to market, but the majority of people that are using a reg hosting firm are using us because of the independence of the governance, risk oversight. Allocators, investors like this model. It gives them a sense of security. So speed to market is not, it's not what's holding the UK back, and it's not what's growing our market. It's other factors. So even if the FCA application process, miraculously sped up to 4 months, I don't think it would impact a lot of the business that we get and some of our competitors do.
And I do a bit of stuff in the US where they have a different model. They've got a CCO outsourcing model, because effectively the rules are different. In the UK, you can be the compliance officer of one firm or a group, but in the US, you can be the compliance officer for loads of different firms. You can outsource yourself a number of different ways. Compare and contrast those models. Do you think, given the fact that America is a vibrant, growing economy where financial services are definitely core to their growth, maybe the model whereby you can be the compliance officer for a number of different things, you have the responsibility, you bring the tool set, rather than having to have the permissions, you've gone, we'll just be a registered compliance person. You can look at us, Mr. Regulator, Miss Regulator, as having competence, having people, but our job is to do that. Maybe that's a different way of looking at the market.
I think it's difficult to compare, because I think the US market is very different. SEC is prescriptive, rules based. Very different. It's complete. If you look at the two regimes, very easy to get authorized in the US. It's a very quick process, and then you're on the hook for the problems that have come later. FCA is totally the opposite, long application process, blah, blah, blah. But I think the other difference in the US is the use of the sort of, in the UK, using a compliance person, having in-house compliance and outside compliance support for an authorized firm is very common. The US, the compliance officer is an incredibly important role, but most US firms will also have will have a law firm alongside that. They will go to legal in a way that the UK industry did not develop in that way. I think it's very clear cut here, and when I deal with lawyers, where that cutoff is between what the lawyers do and then, if it's an authorized firm, what the compliance person and what the compliance consultancy does. It's a different model in the US, so I don't think it's comparable. I think the danger, obviously, of that outsourced is back to the FCA's obsession around competency and capacity. Is, well, what's too many clients in that scenario? And who's judging that? We internally spend an awful lot of time looking at our capacity for new clients, and we have a recruit and hiring plan that literally rolls on continually. But in that scenario, you do worry. I mean, Dubai is the other one that allows the outsourced, but it's very clear on how many clients you can look after. There's a finite, which I think makes sense. Although, some clients would differ in intensity. But so the US to the UK model is really difficult, I think, to compare and contrast really well.
So it's interesting you touched on a number of people, because the FCA released some figures sort of autumn last year about what it saw to be good ratios of staff against numbers of ARs, right? And I know you guys are in that sweet spot of about 10 ARs to each account person and that sort of thing, and you don't touch it. Yet you look at some of the retail things where they've got one compliance head for 50 underlying firms, 100 underlying firms. The model surely has to tighten up, because for all of the stuff that happens in wholesale, you guys, the other providers doing it with wholesale permissions, who really take it seriously and have all of the reporting and the risk management
Yep.
and the people and the automation and the processes
Yep.
and all of the rest of it, versus some of the people in consumer credit, in insurance, in motor finance. Motor finance, you can buy AR hosting for 75 quid a month.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
I don't see how. I mean, the obvious answer is they are not doing what the rest, as you say, what we're doing. They're not doing, to your point, the surveillance, email surveillance. They're not doing trade surveillance. They can't. I don't understand. I mean, I am completely ignorant of the retail world and how that works. But yes, just looking at the numbers from our point of view, I wouldn't sleep at night. It's that
So,
simple.
touching on that, Joe has always been, Joe Vittoria, the other part of Vittoria and Partners, has always been a pioneer of automation. Since I've known him 2010 onwards, he's always been automation. Can I find a systematic way of doing this? Can I get my IT system somehow to support what I'm doing to leverage the people? Yet that doesn't seem to have caught on across the industry. There are a lot of people still issuing quarterly attestations. People aren't. Why is it that you guys have gone that route? And why isn't the FCA singing from the treetops? The only way of doing it is this way. Automation is the only way you can run this business, because I don't see a way you can run it without.
No, I think you're right. And your point about Joe's using technology to leverage our people. And I think this is where what is very important to us, that the systems support our experienced people to be able to do the job, not the other way around. The idea of sort of tick box attestation type approach is not our approach, because we do not think that's sufficient oversight. We get incredibly involved with our new startups. We are there as their compliance person. We're there as their risk oversight. So yeah, Joe's always been a big proponent of making our back end more efficient to enable us to keep having that proper grown up, seasoned professional talking to a client that is having a proper relationship and supporting them. I can't talk to the retail or what other people do, but as I say, the way we do it is the only way. We all go home and sleep easily at night, because all we have is our license. We have nothing else.
Yeah, and it's astounds me when I run across people that use a Microsoft form and we ask them once a quarter to fill it in and then we're done. What? Really? State of the art stuff?
I mean, it's the same as saying, I work in a large bank and compliance sends me a note every quarter and I just check that I've done everything. It seems insane in our world, but.
So obviously the FCA have taken on hundreds and hundreds of new people to populate the AR departments. Division. What have you seen change since they brought on all the people?
Well, we have definitely seen more interaction. Generally, I would say, not only as a firm but as an industry, we have seen an openness from the FCA to actually engage, which is really positive, because again, it's something we've been pushing for a long time. I definitely think we have seen more of an interest in our industry generally from the FCA wanting to understand how it works. And on a practical level, we are seeing, when we're certainly putting in our applications for a new appointed representative or a new client dealing person, that they are beginning to speed up. So it's tentatively very positive so far.
And where do you think the impact of the Treasury consultation will land? Because again, that seemed to be quite odd from an outsider to the industry. You had the FCA doing their huge, great consultation where their first option was ban it and their sort of third option was regulate it. And they did all of that. They put in a load of people. They changed the rules. They changed the rule book, etc., etc. and then a year later the Treasury go, actually, fellas, we're gonna consult about this now, and that optically doesn't seem to be as if the Treasury trusts the FCA and what they've set up, does it?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that I think that's too binary, looking at the thing as two separate things. I think there is, you know, the review of the AR regime and the interest. I think that has sort of not waned, but not become politically as important. So now Treasury are looking at how do you encourage business, and I think they see the AR regime as part of that, but they're also looking at other options, and this sort of, so I think it's more, I think it is aligned. It might not look it, but I don't think the Treasury is questioning what the FCA has done. I think they're moving it on to a different subject. I think we've moved on from the AR regime is dead. We're moving on to the AR regime is there. That helps some people, but how do we also help other people? You know, I was looking at the stats on their assisted hub thing that the FCA has, that they put in place 2 or 3 years ago, but nobody's used it. So I think there's probably a frustration where people are saying it takes forever to get authorised, and the FCA is like, well, we're trying, we're doing things. So I don't see that as a complete disconnect. But they are two separate bodies, let's be honest, and they have different remits.
And so when people are carting around in the market, they've made their money on their franchise desk and they think they can do it more easily themselves. How do they happen across you? Where do you inhabit in the
I mean, usually we see people pretty early doors, to be honest, and that's because normally, let's take, I'm going to mention a big asset manager there, but let's call it ABC Asset Manager.
Right.
So, John and Jane decide over coffee one day, look, we're making a shed load of money for this firm, we want to get out. One of the first things they're probably going to do is look at their restricted covenants in their employment contract and think about fund launch, both of which lead them usually to a law firm. So that is one of our biggest referral channel. I think it's actually 69% of our actually our biggest referral channel is direct and people we've known, but behind that it is the lawyers. So they will go and have a chat to the lawyer will talk about fund setup, and then they'll start talking about substance, and they'll realize it's only John and Jane and there isn't anybody else. So we often will hear from lawyers and the other service providers in our universe. You know, it really depends where somebody starts on their journey. Somebody might start with the administrator, they might start with the lawyer, they might start with the prime broker. So all of that sort of that universe will be referring business to us. But as I say, the majority of stuff that will come at us will either have been client recommended or recommended to Joe or myself. And you know, Joe's name's on the door for a very good reason. He is extremely well known in this industry.
I called him the other day the grandfather of the industry.
Yes, as I say, I bet he hated that, but he's very happy to be a grandfather, but maybe not grandfather of the industry.
Just not of the industry. Very good. And so if I'm that fund manager, how does the engagement go with you guys? Do you have to sit me down in the corner and go, actually, fella, all of that stuff you thought was a person cost is actually an operations cost. Here's how it goes. Or do you find that most people by that time, the lawyers have kicked them around a bit and made them understand the realities of the
really
situation?
Differs. And it really differs. And it's particularly different. For example, we were talking there about sort of John and Jane from a big megalith asset manager. They will have less of an idea of how to structure a small fund because they haven't had to do it. They've been a department that does that. Compliance is over there. Somebody else does that. So people in that journey are usually, the initial conversations we'll be having will be 6, 7, 8 months before anything happens. And those will be conversations around fund jurisdiction. And we get involved in that. From early doors. If they've come out, if John and Jane are now on their second reiteration, which we often also see in this cycle, that maybe they've been involved in a hedge fund, small hedge fund launch before, they're going to have that universe. They're going to have that ecosystem of people
Yeah.
they know that they can go to. So it does differ, but as I say, it's not a quick journey.
Yeah.
With most firms, we are talking, what I would call very early stage, where this is all just a concept.
And is that because when people are coming to see you in the first days, they don't really have the fund set up, they don't
Yeah,
really have the experience,
absolutely.
and most of your job is leading them through, by the way, this is what you're going to have to do. This is
Yeah, I would say I think everybody in our ecosystem of our universe does somewhat of that project management job. So the lawyers will often bring those systems, so we all play our part in that. When I'm having early conversations here, you're talking about, right, where's the fund going to be? Have you thought about administrators?
yeah,
What's your strategy? Because that's going to impact,
yeah,
number one, who you go to. What's the AUM size? Because that's going to impact the other service providers. Completely irrelevant to us, but to everybody else, that is a big
yeah,
consideration. So it's navigating that, finding the right people to put you in touch with the right service
hmm
providers around
hmm
your strategy, your size, and what you want. There are different, different places for different types of firms and what kind of service you want. But I think I would say that's a joint effort from a lot of people. So that would be the lawyer, myself, um, possibly the admin, would all be doing a little bit of that, steering in the right direction, trying to make
yeah,
sure that they're aware of what the world looks like. And for new managers, I mean, various of the big regulatory law firms have all got their own setting up a hedge fund guide, which are incredibly
yeah,
useful,
yeah,
because it lays out everything you've got to think about. And that usually is the biggest struggle. As I say, if you're coming out of a big shop and it's all been done by another department somewhere else, a lot of those people will also look at other service providers like outsourced trading. They may not have ever executed. It's those
yeah,
things that, and just finding, are they going to do their own sort of operations from a internal point of view? Are they going to go and buy a PMS, OMS? How are they going to do that? How are they going to look after surveillance? How are they, all of those things are, part of that journey. But I wouldn't say, it's definitely not me alone.
yeah. And you guys do UK domiciled
Yes.
people at the moment, and you're expanding
Well,
currently to Dubai, right? And
well, with
Switzerland.
great
I remember
timing,
that.
yes, with great timing, we were in the process of getting our application in Dubai. Um,
Mhm.
that obviously, given current events, has taken a little pause, but I think we're quite clear at the moment that it is a pause. We still think that is happening, and then yes, after that, Switzerland is definitely on our agenda. And Dubai is not an odd, won't seem odd to anybody, but Switzerland might. But what we're looking for is where the manager wants to be. So we're not
Right.
looking at fund jurisdictions, because quite that's irrelevant to us. We look after Cayman funds,
Yeah.
Luxembourg, Ireland. That we are interested in where the manager wants to be, and certainly there is a push at the moment, given UK situation, that potentially managers looking to the future are looking to
Mhm.
be outside of the UK. Um, and we're seeing that Switzerland is becoming, uh, you know, uh, I'm not, as one of our competitors did 20 years ago, who announced, when one manager went to Switzerland, that the whole of financial services is suddenly going to
Yeah.
go to Switzerland. But we've been looking at it for a while. I think there is a bit of a move there. And we've also heard, we talk a lot on the allocators side. So we've heard a
Uh-huh.
lot of allocators say, I'm finding people in London, they're great, but at the moment they don't want to be sitting in London. They want to sit somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dubai was an option a month ago. I think for a lot of people, the thought of moving,
Yeah.
your family to Dubai at the moment is probably not
Yeah.
an immediate. But yeah, so Switzerland is next. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I think when we started out, it was Dubai, Switzerland, Australia, um, and
Okay.
then the biggie being the US. But that's a
Mhm.
long way off, and as we say, it's such a different regime. But Australia has an equivalent of what we do.
And why no onshore Europe? Is that just not anywhere that investors want, fund managers want to be?
It's just not as popular. I mean, we've seen one of our competitors set up in Portugal, when Portugal was particularly welcoming.
Yeah.
I think our experience is, you know, it's Switzerland seems more popular at the moment. I think we're also
Okay.
seeing Italy, but it's an easy commute
Yeah.
from Italy to
Yeah.
Switzerland. So yeah, but if we will keep looking at that if for whatever reason, one of the other onshore European nations suddenly made it incredibly tax efficient to move there, and yeah, I'm sure we'd see movement. But yeah, Switzerland for us at the moment is a plan, but again, that's still very much in planning, and yeah, it's it's a
And
it's a
that's just a
want to have.
case of getting the regular. Is there a hosting industry in both Dubai
Mm,
and in Switzerland that they're used to, or will you be pioneering it?
No, Dubai there is already a regulatory hosting firm there who've been there I think 18 months now.
Okay.
So I think the regulator in Dubai is definitely getting their head around our industry. And obviously, Du- and particularly at the moment, Dubai is very open to listening,
Yeah.
and I think that will continue. Yeah, Switzerland doesn't really have an established model, so yes, it is going to be. And I
Yeah.
hope the Swiss regulators aren't listening to this, but we know it's going to be a battle.
And Switzerland is effectively a rules-based regulator. They're not a principle-based one, are they?
It's more rules based.
Okay, so it's more analogous to what you then have to do in the US in terms of a more legalistic approach to hosting than the
Possibly,
principle-based
poss
approach that's currently there.
Yep, yep.
And in terms of the growth of the industry, is it
Mhm.
a finite pool of people that have just decided to up sticks and move to Dubai, or is there a continual, fresh sort of cohort of people going, "Oh, I'm done with my tier one bank. I want to do this now."
It is a continuum, and as much as we're seeing the desire from UK managers potentially to look at other jurisdictions, we've been incredibly busy with the last 6 months with incoming, and for
Yeah,
us, just for our firm, that has been US firms for putting a footprint into London. So as much as there's the pull, we are also seeing at the end of last year, at the end of the year, I think almost 100% of the clients we were looking after were US firms that were
yeah,
either putting senior portfolio managers here or we're putting a distribution arm here.
mm,
So there's always that push and pull, and I can't ever see that changing. So yeah, I'd say I don't think we're seeing a huge drain to Switzerland, but on the flip side, we are seeing a lot of US firms for the first time putting a footprint here. That may only be for 4 or 5 years. Who knows?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know,
So you're right at the edge of where the business is going, right? So if you're seeing an uptick in US money coming here rather than going onshore Europe, then for UK PLC, that's a good leading indicator of the fact that they want
yeah,
to be here and not there.
yes, and I think post Brexit, there was always the concern that big US firms, if they were putting a European footprint, would look at Frankfurt, would look at other places. I think realistically, though, um, London still wins on lifestyle. If you're moving over and you're moving your family over, um, that is playing a big part, and that's always been a big part of US firms. Um, because you talk about a US firm coming into London, but what you're actually talking about is an individual, who's
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
with their family, with and I still think London is seen as the financial services. We're very good at talking down London and the UK at the moment, but yeah, the flip side of that is big US firms want to be here.
yeah. In terms of how a big US firm approaches it, coming from a rules-based thing,
Mhm.
heavily lawyered up to probably what they would see as a slightly antiquated tap of the nose, raise of the eyebrow. How do you
Um,
find that migration works for them? Or do they find
um,
it charmingly quaint?
No, they don't find it charmingly quaint. I will be honest. I think I think most American firms expect to find it charmingly quaint, and then are
Uh-huh.
actually surprised at the rigor and the oversight. There are
Okay.
certain, between there are many similarities between the SEC and the FCA. We're all talking about the same thing. It's compliance, it's blame, it's
Hmm.
it's all those things. I think most US firms, I say, would be it's the flip side, that they're actually surprised that in some areas, I mean, we are a full RIA, so we're a registered investment
Uh-huh.
advisor. So our manual is a blend. And I think
Hmm.
American firms are particularly surprised at things that we have a higher standard for, AML
And
being
what
the
would you
prime
say those
example.
things are?
AML, I mean, it's the one thing that
Okay.
US
Yeah.
firms just do not understand UK AML, and are often surprised that we're sort of saying, no, sorry, your standard is a little bit lower. You've got to bring this up. Um, so they're often surprised at the level of insight we need to UBOs, and the level of detail, because that's not a thing in the US. So I don't
Yeah.
think, no, it's definitely not charmingly antiquated. I think it's probably the other way, that they're, a little surprised at the level of oversight. I mean, surveillance, again, the US very much developed what I would call passive surveillance,
Yeah.
because the SEC rule on sample testing and the
Yeah.
7% has led
Yeah.
a lot of US firms to put a
There is
system
no
in.
percent.
Okay.
That's a damn myth set out by Global Relay, I think. There is no percentage.
They
It's
definitely
one of
used to
those
be. Is
appropriate rules.
okay. Whatever. But I think that's led to, so for example,
Yeah.
in that, very passive surveillance,
Yeah.
whereas we know the FCA has been abundantly clear that buying a system, putting it in the corner, and relying on that without doing is worse than not doing anything, because it's like the old adage of, don't have a compliance manual you're not following, because that's
Yeah.
even worse from a regulatory point of view. So yeah, I think US firms, as I say, there are lots of things that they suddenly go, oh goodness, that's,
Yeah.
when we're saying no, it's active surveillance. This is, there's a
Yeah.
lexicon, it's flags. We are looking, we are not just waiting till something goes wrong and then
Yeah.
going back into an archive to find who did
Yeah.
it. And I think that often surprises them. But I think, yeah, so those two, it's surveillance is particularly one that,
Yeah.
often does,
Well, the nice thing I've found about the US, when you have a query, you can go to your local SEC office, book a meeting, talk to the regulator, and say, if we do it this way, is that okay by you?
yeah,
And if they say yes, and write you an email saying, yeah, that's
mm,
fine, that's then fine.
yeah,
And you can publish that, and the SEC will go, or FINRA will go, yeah, that's what the rule is. We've said that, we've said it to you, that's your bit. So you can approach them with your compliance policy, you can approach them
mm,
supervision, your lexicon, your
yeah.
approach, and have their opinion, and their opinion remains valid. And their opinion isn't, well, we've got a rule book, go have a look at that, we're not telling you. And I
I think,
find that
yeah,
kind of refreshing because so much of the stuff that we do, we're relying on somebody's interpretation,
mhm,
prognostication of what
yes,
the FTA may or may not think. And they issue all sorts of, we're going to look into this area. Oh, great. What does that mean? No, nobody knows what that means. And having spoken to some important people as a representative of working with the smaller end of the market, which is
mm,
who reg hosts typically deal with, um, the FCA investigations department going, we've taken down this mega bank, so everybody should be scared. And I'm like, no, because these people are 20 people big. They don't even know that it's the same thing. And
exactly.
you
They're not
can't,
looking at a JP Morgan fine for, abuse of WhatsApp and thinking, oh, that could be me. It's just, that's not human nature. They're a hedge fund. They
yeah,
don't, it the deterrent of finding a big bank is not, I mean, it's a difficult one. Again, going back to the US, the flip side of that is, in the US, the SEC do fine everybody, but then it becomes so common that it's again not a deterrent, because everybody gets fined. So I don't
yes,
know what
business. Yeah.
I don't know what the middle ground there is.
Well,
yeah.
unfortunately, the middle ground has disappeared. The middle ground was the FCA were going to tell us who was on the naughty step. And they were going to say, of the 300 active investigations, they were into this, that, and the other, and these people. And for some reason, that was anti-competitive, and they can't do that. So now all we know is that the FCA are investigating some people for doing some stuff.
I
Great.
think, I think that's a difficult one. I can see both sides of that argument. That, you know, the idea of transparency and knowing about every investigation, but given the amount of investigations that go on, I do also see the flip side of that. That it because it's not common in the UK. The first people to get under that system would it could close them down. So I think it's a really difficult one. I'm not coming down either side on that. I think I think there was a pretty big outcry when the FCA suggested it. And it's the other also the difference. The FCA here, I think, would say that they try and work with firms, they try and remedy things, and get them sorted. Again, that does leave some of us wondering, what's happened.
I understand that approach, and it's very nice, I guess, but it doesn't really give customers any idea, right? Unless you've got a Section 166 that's disclosable, the FCA can be all over your business and your customers won't know. I don't understand why the FCA are so silent about it, even in the thematic area. What are you working at? Oh, you should look at our speeches. No, tell me, what do you find to be important right now? What are you looking at? The only way I've found to do it is to throw a freedom of information request in and say, categorize this for us. And they've DK'd 8 of my freedom of information requests as onerous, to say, what are you actively doing? Because when you go and tell them, you must have this with people becoming ARs as secondees. The FCA's hot on this. Show me. The FCA have never said the first thing about that. I think you're making that up to scare me. No. We know people that this is happening to. Prove it. The FCA won't say. And it makes it very difficult to be either in your shoes saying, the reason that we've put in these policies, procedures, and processes is because we know the FCA does this. And if you're your client, I guess they go, prove it. Show me where the FCA does that. Show me the cases. Show me the outcomes. Show me the data.
I think that's probably definitely more I would imagine that happens more in authorized firms. And I say that because, so if you're directly authorized, I think probably your compliance officer coming and saying to somebody, we need to do this, and that person turning around saying, prove it. We get less of that because I suppose our relationship is, well, this is our interpretation of the FCA. We have spent time with the FCA, and quite honestly, these are our rules. And it's not a take it or leave it, but it is you're on a platform. We hold everybody to a higher standard. And that is, so we get less pushback, but I can imagine that in-house compliance officers get that all of the time. And
as a platform, Sarah, do you not want the FCA to come out and go, this is what good looks like, this is unacceptable?
We'd love to.
Because without that, there are a whole load of platforms that go, we've got our stamps, we'll take you on, right up until the financial ombudsman shuts them down or the FCA sanctions them or whatever. And it just strikes me as silence is the worst possible policy that the FCA could ever have in this area, because regulations are important, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, yes, I mean, we, obviously our industry, there are people we get frustrated that potentially are not doing the level of cover that we're doing. That is frustrating. And obviously, as you alluded earlier, in the retail space, it's just a bit insane. But I suppose most of the people we're dealing with are grown-up individuals that are talking to investors, are talking to other people, and probably the talking to the allocators side of things. The allocators amount of due diligence that they will have done on us in the past. So yeah, it's not quite the transparency of we've got a regulatory hosting rulebook.
Yeah.
But I think between an individual's due diligence on a regulatory hosting firm, and particularly in the rise at the moment, everybody's doing SMAs. Those SMAs providers are DDing at regulatory hosting and should be. That it makes perfect sense. So I do understand what you're saying, but I think it's number one, difficult. If you just want to say, I want to find a reg hosting firm, how do you do that? Because there's nothing on the register to say. And then how do you differentiate between that? I suppose for us, it's the same sort of questions you're asking. How big are you? Experience of your staff, ratios of staff to client. They're the questions that will lead you down to this is a player, that place, or I'm sort of an outlier. And like everything, if you get 3 quotes and one is outlandishly cheaper than the other 2, it's like a builder. You probably don't want to go there.
Yeah. And where do you see the industry developing over the next 4 or 5 years? Because it's been through change. Obviously, back in 2017, 2018, the FCA did turn up and say, you guys shouldn't have as many clients and you're not allowed to be open and this, that, and the other. So they did try to weed it all out. And it just seems that they've gone a bit quiet and there's some players that shouldn't be there. And
I think there's probably more activity than we know, but this goes back to the transparency thing. I am only surmising. I don't think the FCA has.
You mean they've got to be doing something?
I didn't say that. You're putting words in my mouth.
I did.
Yeah.
You've been nothing but nice about them. I think they're useless. You think they're great. I get that.
They are a vital part of our industry.
Yeah.
I think I get what you're saying. I think number one, there is still activity going on. Treasury has made it clear that they want this industry to survive. The FCA has, I think, taken the view of, right, let's get it regulated properly. So I still think things are happening. I also think a bit, we have seen a number of players remove themselves from this industry. Now, whether that's due to an FCA review or whether it is a realization, particularly among those firms that did it as a sideline. When I started, I was often competing against, well, my mate says he can host me, and and that grew. It became a revenue stream for funds. I think those kind of what I'd call peripheral hobby hosting firms have disappeared, and I think they disappeared with the first consultation paper. That the minute they saw where the FCA was going on this, a lot of them sat down and went.
They're still out there. They are.
Yes,
they are
you probably have more visibility on that than I do. But yeah, I mean, we had an interesting stat that we looked at when during COVID, and when a certain big player stopped doing the appointed representative regime, there was a proliferation of every man and his dog suddenly offering it all over the place. And that has disappeared. That has come and gone, which I think is a good thing. But I think our interaction with the FCA is not finished. We're still going to be talking to them. Joe is very keen to try and get an association of wholesale institutional regulatory hosting firms. We're trying to get the FCA involved in that. We're making some progress. So I think, I mean, I don't think the industry is going anywhere. There's still a need for it, even if the FCA, as they speeded up their application process to 4 months. The industry will still be needed. What we can offer, what reg host firms can offer new startups, and those firms coming into London is still going to be applicable. I think we're going to see still a lot of oversight, which is not a bad thing. And we may find more players in the future just saying, actually, we can't keep to this level.
That there will be a round of consolidation to bigger, more automated players that can afford the systems and the process and the people? Or do you see it still as a artisanal, almost intermediate industry that isn't being picked up by the administrators, custodians, fund admins, but possibly could be if they decided to aggregate it? Where do you see it going?
It's an interesting one because we saw the massive consolidation. We saw the the likes of Lawson Connor go into
Yeah,
IQ, and we've seen that model. I think there is probably a perception that regulatory hosting inherently carries its risk, and
yeah,
a one-stop shop can be great, but is brought down by its weakest part. So, are we going to see those big P shops rounding everybody up? What? Who have they got to round up?
yeah.
I'm not sure we're going to see the repeat of that in the way we saw it.
I
We've
do
definitely
not
got.
think there's another wave, because certainly if you look at the US and the CCO outsourcing, they were all mopped up by a big provider. The big
Yeah,
provider ran it for a bit. The people finished their non-competes. The big provider put the margin up, and so it starts again at the bottom. Do you not? Because there's been a wave coming through of
I think there will be another wave, but I don't think it'll necessarily concentrate on regulatory hosting. I think it will be compliance consultancy. I think there has
right,
been a recognition that tagging on regulatory hosting to lots of other services is not. It, People don't have the risk appetite for the reg hosting part of it. If you can,
yeah,
have another consolidation of smaller compliance consultancies, and there are a proliferation of small to
yeah,
medium players, I can definitely see a consolidation of that.
yeah.
But you do get to the point of, if there was much more consolidation at top level, who's buying them after this? Who's buying Apex
That's
next time round? Who's buying
yeah,
IQ next? So that's always been, where do you go after this
yeah,
big?
yeah.
I don't know, but I think you could be right. I just don't think regulatory hosting will necessarily form a really big part of that, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I struggle to see how regulatory hosting, which is a balance sheet business, fits well with a time and materials or a software business, but with fund admins, custodians, prime brokers, who are all about a balance sheet business,
Yep.
it rounds out their product portfolios quite nicely. Come to us for your books and records, and we'll do your regulation on the side, is much more compelling, I guess, as an argument, than come for some compliance consultancy and stay for the reg hosting. I don't necessarily think that you run that business the same as you run that business up and down the management chain.
No, and I'd agree. But yeah, I mean, if we are one of the few independents.
Yeah,
That's we.
yeah, yeah,
I don't expect that to change. I don't. Well, we're certainly not ever going to go the private equity route.
yeah,
But our view on that has always been just stick to our knitting. Is what it's all we know how to do. I don't want. I can't sell anything else. This is it.
yeah. Very good. So we're coming up on the hour. What is it? If people were looking for a reg host, why Vittoria and Partners?
Um, I think we're not right for everybody. But what I would say is, if you're looking for institutional level service, if you're looking for a firm that is going to pass allocator institutional DD, and you're looking for a firm where we're with you through the journey, then we're probably the right shop. If you're looking for more of a tick box, we're definitely not the place. So there are different players in this industry. I would say our unique factors: number one, ownership. Every single member of our staff has a meaningful equity in this business. We're owned by staff, friends, and family. That does give us that obviously helps enormously with retention of staff. Everybody is here for the long haul. That does make a big difference. That resonates with some people, but I totally appreciate that other people, as you say, going to a provider that says, I can do your admin, I can do all of that, all packaged, and your reg hosting, can be appealing. We're just a different offering. So yeah, it's experience of the team and our ownership structure, I think, makes us reasonably unique. That the person that you'll be dealing with day one will be Joe and I. We'll
Yeah,
still be here till they take us out in a box. And the person you're dealing with from a compliance and risk point of view is very unlikely to change through your journey with us.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining me today. I think we've had a thoroughly informative hour, certainly for me. And I'm going to go and hang my head in shame when the FCA come calling and say, but Sarah was nice about you.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. And it was, an hour that went very quickly. So thank you.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much. Please tune in for the next compliance catch-up, which will be in 4 or 6 weeks, where we will have another industry expert to chat about their area of expertise. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Bye-bye.